I hope I don't sound pretentious with this upload or recording. I promise I'm not. I promise I'm not an elitist or anything like that, but I've noticed something in my reading patterns. It feels like 3 out of the last 5 modern sci fi reads that I've had, I just haven't enjoyed at all. And I do not read a lot of modern sci fi, and maybe that's why. Whereas on the other hand, like 4 out of my last 5 classic sci-fi books I've really loved. And I've tried to think about why that is. Could be the prose, could just be the ideas in the books. I click more with the classic sci-fi. It just feels like it's more adventurous, more hard sci-fi. And modern sci-fi, I think, at least with the books I've read, all have this one thing in common. I think it's really weakening my experience with modern sci-fi. And that is, recently, I've been reading a lot of modern sci fi that has great, heartfelt messages and themes that are not executed well at all. I love the ideas. I love these messages that they're writing about, but I just do not like the execution. The streak started last year when I read Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki, I believe is how you say the name. A message about inclusion, taking care of marginalized groups. I agree with the message. I hated the execution. I thought it was a mess and it was all over the place. One of my least favorite reads ever, and I hate saying that. After I read that book, I jumped right into the Kaiju Preservation Society. That was my first John Scalzi book, famous for Old Man's War. I could not stand that book at all, Kaiju Preservation Society. But I did love Old Man's War, so I do like some modern sci-fi. After that, actually earlier this year, one of my first reads this year was The Mountain and the Sea by Ray Naylor. A beautiful message about what it means to be human and being accepting of others, right? I agree with it too. I did not like the execution. And all of this is going to continue because actually last month, I'm recording this in July, I read this book at the end of June. I've been a little slow with my uploads, but all of this is going to continue with one of my more recent reads, The Endless Vessel by Charles Soule. It is a book with an amazing message about perseverance and having heart, and I'll talk about it more in a little bit, but I just did not really enjoy it. And hopefully this review I'll be able to pick up as to why that is, because I am using these reviews to kind of think about my own reading habits and what I enjoy or dislike from a book. So bear with me. Hopefully you'll like this review, and I'll talk about it right now. I want to start by giving a little bit of background information on the plot, maybe the creation of the Endless Vessel. This book is a direct response, almost a parallel to the 2020 pandemic. But instead of a world ravaged by COVID, it's going to be a world ravaged by what is known as the gray. This disease leaves people in one of 3 states, either a state of complete numbness, despair, or as a manic. And those people who are infected with the manic side are known as Team Joy Joy. Kind of a silly name, and I'll talk about some of that later on. And Team Joy Joy is going to serve as one of the main antagonists of this novel. There's no known cure for the gray. People are also unsure exactly how it spreads between people, but most people agree that the best defense against the gray in this novel is to live a life with meaning and to not become hopeless. And because of that, we're going to follow our main protagonist, Lily Barnes. And she is going to be a scientist, a young scientist living in Hong Kong. And her job as a scientist is working for a company that is trying to, I believe, do research into scrubbing CO2 from the atmosphere, help with climate change and to really bring about positive changes to the earth. If they cannot find a cure for the gray, might as well try to find a way to help improve the earth, all right? But Lily is forced to leave her work. I'm not going to talk about why. That is somewhat of a spoiler, I guess. But she's forced to leave her work behind. And she needs to find new meaning. And the way that she finds new meaning is by looking for an advanced hidden society that may actually have a cure for the gray. She's going to go on a cross-continental journey from Hong Kong to the UK to the middle of the Atlantic. And if this sounds like an adventure story, it's because it actually is. It's pretty adventurous. I saw one reviewer talk about this book almost like national treasure, the novel, and I completely agree with that. Like a lot of my books I've been reading recently, The Endless Vessel is broken up into parts. The first third, part one, is going to be the globe-trotting, adventurous part where we follow Lily again from Hong Kong to the UK to the Atlantic. But we're also going to see glimpses and pieces from another character named, I believe, Aunt Jane. She is going to be, again, one of the main antagonists. She is one of the leaders of Team Joy Joy. If all of this sounds very high pace, almost frantic, I will have to regrettably say that it was very frantic. It was all over the place. I believe the whole first third of the novel takes place over the course of 2 or 3 days, really, in the novel. And that was a lot. It did not give a lot of time or development to the characters really at all. And I think that was one of the biggest weaknesses. From what I gathered about Charles Soule, the author, he is most known as a comic book writer for Marvel. I believe it's Marvel. For Marvel and for Star Wars is what I know most of all. So I do know he's good at writing characters. He's good at writing with established characters, but there are no established characters in here. None of the characters in the first third were really developed, especially Aunt Jane, almost said protagonist, the antagonist. Right? If you enjoy your villains with depth or personality, stay away from this book. I hate being really negative, but that was really a detractor from it. It almost felt like the movie version, or even sometimes the book version of Lord Voldemort from Harry Potter. It was just, Aunt Jane was just evil for the sake of being evil. She was infected with the gray, but there wasn't really anything that made her interesting. I will say in this book, there's actually a character who sounds more interesting than Aunt Jay, but they weren't the antagonists. They weren't even really focused on. They were mentioned like 2 or 3 times in this novel. But this character that I thought was more interesting was kind of the beginning of the spread of the gray, but Charles Soule chose not to focus on that. And I really felt like that was a missed opportunity. But part one, again, going back to part one was just very, again, frantic, I think is the best word to put it. It was a little messy, it was all over the place, but it did get me to continue reading because I did want to know what was going on. So there is potential there with the mystery, with a little bit of the tension, right? And this is all going to lead to part 2 of the novel. But before I get completely into part 2, I want to finish talking about the characters. I talked about Aunt Jane a little bit. I need to talk about our protagonist, Lily Barnes. Lily Barnes is, I hate to say it, very flat. She's not developed either at all, which is a shame for a book because you need your main character to be developed. And I don't think there was any space at all given to Lily. I don't like making a joke about this because it shouldn't be a joke, but this is really how I felt. Lily Barnes had one personality trait, and that was the fact that she had a dead father. I hate making a joke about it. I hate making light of that, but it is the truth of this novel. That is her only personality trait. That's her only defining feature. She has a dead father, and her dead father's he was a scientist in a way. His death is going to influence her to become a scientist as well. That's it. That's her only motivation, really. And we've seen that in plenty of novels. There's nothing wrong with having tropes or cliches as long as they're done well. And I really felt like that was not done well really at all. Again, because the pacing was it was too much. It was too quick for me and my enjoyment. There might be some minor spoilers in the rest of this review because that's really the only way to talk about this book. So if you are interested in reading this book, maybe click away and stop watching. But But again, part one, Lily is defined by her dead father, and her relationship with her mother. She felt like her mother abandoned her after her father's death. Right, I felt like that part is well done, but it is all thrown away at the end of part one, at the beginning of part two, because at the end of part one, her mother develops the gray as well, and she loses all personality too, which is the point of the gray, point of the disease, right? But there are hints and moments that we're going to get some tension between Lily and her mother, and it's immediately thrown out the window. And I felt like that was a missed opportunity. We are going to continue to miss those opportunities because in part two, we're going to focus on a completely new cast of characters. But it was my favorite part of the book. It makes no sense. In my mind, what makes part two a little bit stronger than part one is definitely the characters. I really feel like the characters in part two actually have agency, and that's something that you need in your novel. Your characters need to have great motivations, or at least believable motivations, and it needs to feel like they are making decisions for themselves rather than just moving the plot. Part one, I don't feel like Lily made any decisions. A lot of them were just accidents. In part two, it was a lot more believable. I really enjoyed the characters in part two. We were going to follow the origins of the super secret society that might have a cure for the gray. And the super secret society is going to start off in the 1700s. And the reason why this society is founded is because they are looking for really a cure to death. The character that we're going to follow in there, her husband passes away from an aneurysm, and she's going to spend her entire life. Her life's goal is to find a cure for death or to bring him back. And I thought that was pretty strong. I thought that was, very believable. A young wife is, looking to bring back her dead husband, and I thought it was really great. Unfortunately, it does have one major issue, very much like part one, where in part one we travel all around the world in 3 days, in like a third of the novel. In this third of the novel, we're going to travel from the 1700s to the 1950s. I enjoy novels that show a passage of time, but this probably wasn't how I would prefer it to happen, because once again, besides the I would say the founders of the super secret society, it's fun to say. Besides those founders, we really don't get a lot of the other characters developed, and that's going to be just another big issue with this novel. I cannot stress that enough. The characters were not really characters, and I hate saying that. I love reading books for the plot. I love reading books for the characters as well. I think you need to have a balance of both, and unfortunately, there weren't any characters present in this novel. But part two, again, was a little bit more fun. I did look up some other reviews, and I saw that some people believe that it did muddle the plot again, because we do go back in time. We have part one with Lily in the present day. We have part two in the 1700s again to the 1950s. I do agree with that statement as well. It does muddle it up a little bit, but I do feel like it gave enough background to make at least the ending somewhat better. And we'll talk about the ending right now without spoiling as much as I can, because boy, I tell you, the ending was one of the worst things I've ever read. All right, part three. I cannot say much about part three because that does spoil the entire book, but I can say this. All right, part one, we're in the present day. Part two, we're in the past. Part three, we're back in the present day. And the main conflict in part three only happens because the characters act dumb. That is the only reason why it happens. I do not believe at all the explanation in the novel. I cannot stand when characters, especially, again, we're going to have the secret society that's supposed to be a bunch of really intelligent, probably the most intelligent people on Earth, a large group of them, make a mistake. And intelligent people can act dumb. Intelligent people can make mistakes. But this one was not believable at all, and that's really the whole crux as to why this conflict happens in part three. And I just could not believe it. I could not stand it. I almost threw the book. There are very few times where I get actually angry at a book, but I feel like my intelligence was insulted in this book because of part three. I felt like the good energy, the good vibes that part two had developed for me. I did actually enjoy part two. I almost felt like I wished it was the entire novel. But all of those good moments were thrown away immediately in part three. I cannot believe that the author chose to have this event happen in part three. Um, if you don't like it when characters in horror movies split up or make dumb mistakes, you are not going to like part three at all. But I will say one thing: part three, it does end on at least a somewhat positive note with a great message. Again, that's going to be really the theme of this. It is a modern sci-fi book with a great message, great themes that I do believe in. Right? It is tough to find hope sometimes in a very hopeless world. But you know, this book, yeah, that's all I can say really. The book does end at least somewhat on a positive note. But I don't know what else I can say about that. I can't stand just intelligent characters acting like that. It makes no sense. At the end of the day, when I think about giving a rating to this book, some people may believe that I would give it 1 star. 1 star is reserved for the just absolute worst things. And this was not the worst thing that I've ever read. All right. I enjoyed part two. I enjoyed the message, again, of this book. But I feel like, once more, there are no characters in this book. And just that one part, the conflict in part three was just so unbelievable that just ruined the entire thing for me. So at the end of the day, I gave this 2 stars. I think I rank my books as well. I'm obsessed with rankings. I love college sports. Maybe I'll talk about that more in the future. But all the books I've ever read, I have them all on a list. I put them down, in a spot on my ranking list. And I'm pretty sure, I'll have to look back on the list, but I'm pretty sure this is the lowest ranked 2-star book. So there is that. It might have been really close to 1 star. I feel bad for leaving a negative review. I don't really see myself posting a lot of these, but truthfully, I haven't read as much this month, and I really feel like I needed to review something. And I do feel like this book has all the makings of something that could be on the short list for a Nebula or a Hugo because of what I saw with The Mountain and the Sea. Another book that I didn't particularly enjoy, but it got a lot of hype for award season. I know awards aren't everything, but I did want to talk about my opinion about a book that could see that in its future because it has all the hallmarks of a Nebula book. Maybe I'm just wrong, but if you read this book or if you have read it, I know I would love to hear your thoughts as well. So leave me a comment, but hopefully I will see you in 10 days as well. I'll see you next time.